If you want to become an editor or understand the film that you watch regularly, layer by layer, then this book.
It would be in the blink of an eye.
Walter Murch is one of the most respected film editors of all time.
In the blink of an eye.
And his book, In the Blink of an Eye,
Is in the blink of an eye.
I know you are intelligent enough to listen to this audiobook to enrich your intelligence much more. What can be done to help with this problem of size, the miniature versus the mural? First, as with image detail, be aware that the eye takes in a large picture differently at a different rate than a small one. Second, conform the 35mm film and have as many screenings with as large a screen as your production can manage. Third, and this is my own personal solution, cut out 2 little paper figures and place them on either side of the monitor screen, making them the correct size in relationship to the screen as real human beings will be when the film is finally projected in a theater. So if I am looking at a 22-inch widescreen in the editing room, I will make my little people 4.5 inches tall. This will make the monitor screen look, with a little imagination, as if it is 30 feet wide. Generally, I like this kind of solution because it's simple. You don't think it would amount to much, but this practice helps tremendously in solving problems before they occur. Why don't we just edit in large rooms with big screens? Well, with digital editing and video projection, we could very easily be editing with a 30-foot screen. The real estate for the room would be expensive, however, more expensive than my little paper leprechauns. It would be an interesting experiment, however, to edit with a 30-foot screen. General observations. The celluloid Amazon. No matter what editing system you are using, you will always be confronting astronomical numbers of different possible versions. Remember that mathematical formula with the in it. When those numbers were physically represented by mountains, tons of actual film, you knew instinctively that you had to have a plan and be organized from the start. Contemplating the thicket of 500,000 or 1,000,000 feet of dailies is like peering into the Amazon jungle. Who would go in there without a map and adequate supplies? One of digital systems' dangers is that, superficially, they turn that Amazon jungle into a video game without apparent consequences. If you lose, you simply start over again from the beginning. No film has actually been touched. There are no loose ends to restitch together. In a certain trivial sense, this is true, but it doesn't mean that a real Amazon isn't lurking behind the virtual one, with real consequences should you lose your way. There should always be planning, no matter what. You only have so much time. You can never explore all the possible versions. There should always be a map. Human memory has its limitations. You should always take detailed notes of what you've seen. Theseus needed his thread to get out of the Minotaur's maze. With no plan, no map, no thread, film editing becomes just a thrashing about, a slamming together of images and sounds for momentary effect. But this kind of effect will have no long-term resonance with the film as a whole. So, paradoxically, the hidden advantage of editing sprocketed film was that the weight and volume of it encouraged the editor to take things seriously and to plan ahead before jumping in, to develop certain strategies and defensive mechanisms. For me, this took the form of my reverse storyboard system of images and my database system of notation. All of us who have grown up as editors of sprocketed film were privileged to develop our own strategies for dealing with our own Amazons. And many of these strategies should not now be thoughtlessly discarded, but rather adapted to the digital age that is upon us. Regulated postal service was finally established in Great Britain, and Royal Mail started to be carried on trains for the first time. Somewhere around 1840, it unleashed a torrent of letter writing among those who were able to do so. People routinely dashed off 20-page letters 3 times a week to several correspondents simultaneously, not so much because they had anything particularly compelling to say to each other, but simply from the exhilaration of being able to say it and have it reliably received across the country in a matter of days, rather than the unreliable weeks that it took in the days of coach and horses. Something similar is happening today with the internet. In fact, any significant technological breakthrough will create a surge of exploratory interest that can only be satisfied by creating a pretext for the exploration. For a while, what is communicated is less important than the means by which it is communicated. Eventually, down the road, the new technology is assimilated and content reestablishes its primacy. We are somewhere along that road with computer-assisted editing, but since things are still evolving so rapidly, it's hard to say exactly how far we have come. I sense that we have actually come a long way in a short time. When I wrote the first edition of this book 8 years ago, I felt that we would not know where we were until 4 milestones had been passed. 1. Memory storage had become more efficient by an order of magnitude, so that it's possible to store at least 40 to 100 hours of high-quality picture online, having it all equally accessible at all times. 2. The cost of a fully operational system capable of editing a feature drops well below $100,000, or into the range that you would expect to spend for a K-Chem. 3. The creation of the digital equivalent of the 35mm sprocket timecode relationship, a universal standard that would operate across all the technical environments in which image and sound are manipulated, and which would provide an immutable point of reference for the picture-sound relationship. 4. 35mm film is no longer shown theatrically. Release prints are replaced by a digital equivalent that is as good or better than 35mm film. As of the year 2001, the first 3 of those milestones have now been passed, and the 4th, digital projection, is with us but not yet universal. 1. In 1994, it became possible, technically and economically, to store the entire digitized workprint of a feature film on hard disks that were simultaneously accessible to the editor and the editor's assistant. In 1999, the Insider stored 1,200,000 feet, 222 hours of workprint, the most that any film had digitized up to that point. Coincidentally, the same amount of workprint as Apocalypse Now. 2. In 1996, an Avid system with 2 editorial workstations cost $160,000 or $80,000 a station, compared to the price of a KM 8-plate, which was around $65,000. In 1999, Any Given Sunday had 9 workstations, 6 editors, and 3 assistants, all accessing the same set of hard drives. Number 3, in 1997, Open Media Framework software became available. OMF allows different sound and picture editing systems to talk to each other, a more sophisticated version of how the sprocket timecode relationship allows different 35mm and tape systems to remain in sync with each other. A functioning OMF meant that on the talented Mr. Ripley, the work that I did on the 8 soundtracks in my Avid was exported to the Pro Tools workstations that were being used by Pat Jackson and her dialogue editors. As a result, all of the sound cuts, overlaps, level changes, fades, and dissolves were reproduced exactly and applied to the sound in the hard drives of the Pro Tools systems, where they could be further refined. It is important to remember that, as with all computerized systems, the creative decisions about what to do with the sound are held in a separate place from the sound itself. Only the decisions are being exported from Avid to Pro Tools. The sound, uncut and unmanipulated, is present on the hard drives of both systems. Prior to OMF, the selected sound would have to be reloaded in real time, and then the sound editors would have to recreate all of the cuts, fades, dissolves, etc. that had been made in the Avid. In effect, they would have to reinvent the wheel that had already been created. Number 4, in 1999, Tarzan and Ideal Husband and Toy Story 2 were all exhibited in digital projection in selected theaters in the United States and Europe. The implications of this last development are perhaps the most profound of all. 35mm film has been the physical and metaphorical foundation upon which the whole superstructure of motion pictures has been built. Its eventual elimination and replacement by a powerful, flexible, but elusive string of digits raises technical and artistic questions that will take many years to resolve. The digital future. Sound editors have always thought in what I would call the vertical and horizontal dimensions at the same time. The sound editor naturally moves forward through the film in horizontal time. One sound follows another. But he also has to think vertically, which is to say, what sounds are happening at the same time. There might be, for example, the background sound of a freeway along with birds singing, a plane passing overhead, footsteps of pedestrians, etc. Each of these is a separate layer of sound, and the beauty of the sound editor's work, like a musician's, is the creation and integration of a multidimensional tapestry of sound. Up until now, however, picture editors have thought almost exclusively in the horizontal direction. The question to be answered was simply, what's next? As you can tell from my math at the beginning, that's complicated enough. There are a tremendous number of options in the construction of a film. In the future, that number is going to become even more cosmic because film editors will have to start thinking vertically as well, which is to say, what can I edit within the frame? Optical effects work has become sophisticated and subtle, many times not even noticeable as an effect. This permits the director or editor to say, I don't really like that sky after all. Or I think this should be winter, so let's get rid of the leaves in this shot. In the near future, machines such as the Avid, which are good at manipulation in the sequential horizontal dimension, will fuse with special effects machines such as the Inferno, which are good at manipulation in the simultaneous vertical dimension. There will be some unforeseen consequences. Can one editor actually handle all this? Or will the work be divided between two crews, a vertical team and a horizontal team? In the old days, if you wanted to do a special effect, such as replacing the blue sky with another color, you had to use a special VistaVision or 70mm camera to get a large format negative so that the grain of multiple reprintings wouldn't show. Now, because of the accuracy of digital reproduction, none of that is an issue. A tremendous amount of time also used to be spent in shooting special effects. If somebody flew through the air, they were attached to cables. Consequently, the cameraman had to light the scene so that the cables would be as invisible as possible. Now, with digital effects, you make the cables big and brightly colored because they then become easier to see and digitally remove. The Holy Grail, of course, is an Avid Inferno editing effects machine that actually produces the final product, not just a sketch of the final product. To some extent, this has already been achieved in television, but not in features, where the resolution has to be correspondingly much higher for the big screen. While we are at it, here are several predictions that will probably materialize in the near future, if they haven't already by the time this book comes out. The end of magnetic film. Revolutionary in its own way, when it appeared around 1950, sprocketed magnetic sound film is already being displaced by removable drives running in sync with the projector. We used jazz drives on the talented Mr. Ripley. Each of these can be copied instantly and is capable of holding the information of 40 reels of magnetic film at a savings of more than 40:1. Direct feed from the camera. Some kind of beam splitter device that will allow a digital disc recording to be made alongside the 35mm film. This disc recording will be delivered to the editor immediately, rather than waiting for the film to be developed and synced, screened, telesigned, and digitized. This will be a temporary solution pending the development of all digital cameras and the elimination of film as a recording medium. Competition for the Avid. At the moment, the Avid system is by far the most frequently used professional system, followed by Lightworks, which has had a difficult few years recently. Serious threats to Avid's dominance, however, are now coming from very inexpensive, almost consumer-level systems, such as Apple's Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere, Edit DV, and Media 100. Final Cut Pro, for instance, is now commonly used for cable television features, yet its cost is 1/20th of an Avid system. Until recently, these systems were unable to provide a reliable interface with 35mm negative, and so their use was practically limited to motion pictures whose final format was video. Third-party software, however, such as FilmLogic, has been invented to fill this gap, and Apple has recently acquired Focal Point Systems, the developers of FilmLogic, so Apple seems intent on competing directly with Avid. It will be interesting to see Avid's response to these developments. The final product. The day will come when the editor is dealing with images of such resolution that they will be projectable in a theater. In effect, the output of the Avid will be the answer print. As I mentioned, this is already happening in television, and following Moore's law, processing speed per unit of currency doubles every 18 months. It's simply a matter of time before the hypothetical Avid Inferno, or some equivalent machine, is capable of real-time manipulation of images with a resolution of 4,000 lines, the equivalent of 35mm film. All of these projected developments point in roughly the same direction toward an ever more integrated digital cinema. Early in this new millennium, we are still living in a hybrid world where sprocketed 35mm film plays an important role in production and exhibition. But I doubt that film will remain vital much longer. In some ways, the situation is similar to that of domestic lighting around the turn of the last century. In 1900, chandeliers were fitted for both gas and electricity. Electricity was new, it was exciting, it produced a brilliant light, what the French disapprovingly called a fleshless flame. But electricity was also expensive and not quite as dependable as it should have been. And so there would also be gas, romantic, dangerous, inefficient, fleshy, but familiar and dependable. For the moment, cinema is caught in a similar double chandelier phase, in which we have to deal with film as a sprocketed photographic material medium and with the electronic image as a digital immaterial medium. But just as surely as gaslight passed from our daily lives, sooner or later, so will 35mm film. What then are the technical and artistic implications of a completely digital cinema? Will it be its own kind of fleshless flame or something else? A difficult question because we are right in the middle of furious change, but perhaps something can be learned from similar situations in the development of other forms of art. In fact, Gesamtkunstkino, total art cinema. If only we could just stop that gentleman in the top hat coming out of the Metropolitan Opera. No. Him, the one with the fur collar, and ask about the performance of Tannhauser he has just attended. Perhaps, if he were agreeable, we could walk with him up Broadway and let the conversation go where it might, since this is December 1899, and one's thoughts are naturally turned toward the coming 20th century. What about the stunning production that he has just seen? Truly unbelievable. And perhaps a word about the future of opera, specifically Richard Wagner's concept of Gesamtkunstwerk, total artwork, the ultimate fusion of music, drama, and image. What wonders will audiences be seeing in 100 years' time? As he stops to consider this last question, one can't help but glance over his shoulder at the sight of dozens of people in the shop behind him, mostly men, mostly young, mostly immigrants, with their heads plunged into some kind of mechanism, hands cranking madly away in a kind of trance. By chance, we have stopped in front of an amusement arcade, and the men inside are operating kinetoscopes and watching images of young ladies disrobing over and over again before their very eyes. As our fur-collared friend is excitedly anticipating a century of high culture and operatic triumphs to make those of the 19th century pale in comparison, we, time travelers who know the truth, can't help suppressing a smile. Imagine our new acquaintance's astonishment and repugnance at being told that the noisy and offensive contraptions behind him would shortly transform themselves into the dominant art form of the 20th century and stage their own assault on the citadel of total artwork. And that although his beloved operas would still be performed in 1999 and lavishly, they would be, mostly, reworkings of the 19th century's pre-served in amber canon, the West's own version of Japanese kabuki. Of course, we won't disappoint him with our insights, which would seem like typical ravings from the strange-looking creatures he usually takes pains to avoid. What is New York coming to these days? Goodbye. Nice talking to you. Without much warning, we are back in the New York of December 1999. Toy Story 2 has recently opened, and the lines have not gotten any shorter. In fact, at one theater in Times Square, they've gotten somewhat longer. Strolling by the marquee, we discover why. Toy Story 2 is being projected digitally, without film. The sprocketed 35mm celluloid that serviced our friends at the amusement arcade in 1899, and the expanding cinematic dreams of the 20th century through the arrival of sound, color, widescreen, 3 dimensions, for a few years anyway, Dolby Stereo. The physical medium that carried all these inventions uncomplainingly on its shoulders is at the end of the century about to put down its burdens and slip away. In a few years, film will become a historical curiosity, like parchment or vellum, and the 3 ubiquitous symbols for the motion picture. The reel, the clapstick, and film itself with those characteristic little square sprocket holes running down its edges will all be anachronistic, referring to a forgotten technology, like the carpenter's ads, eds, and all. Is this something to be concerned about? By way of comparison, Gutenberg's first Bible was printed on vellum, a beautiful and tactile organic substance, but printing only really took off with the invention of paper, which was cheap and easy to manufacture. Gutenberg's concept of movable type transcended the medium used for the printing itself. Digital, almost certainly, will prove to be paper to celluloid's parchment. So let's declare confidently that although film may fade away, there will always be pictures that move. The insight that gave rise to motion pictures, Joseph Plateau's quantization of movement in the 1830s, extended to photography by Muybridge in the 1870s, is as profound in its way as Gutenberg's invention of printing in the 1450s, and just as independent of the medium of transmission. As astonishing as it is to see digitally projected images, clear or clearer than 35mm film, with none of the scratches, dirt, or jitter that infects even the most pristine of 35mm prints, the truth is that for 15 years, the film industry has been steadily turning digital from the inside out. The triumphs of digital visual effects, of course, were already well known before their apotheosis in Jurassic Park, Titanic, Phantom Menace, and The Matrix. But the arrival of digital projection will trigger the final capitulation of the two last holdouts of film's 19th century mechanical analog legacy. Projection, the end of the line, is one. The other is the original photography that begins the whole process. The current film industry is a digital sandwich between slices of analog bread.